Ready? Well, good morning. Good to see those of you that actually made it into the auditorium this morning. We'll have a few others joining us here momentarily. We are in the 9th chapter of Joshua, and this is the chapter that introduces us to the Gibeonites. There's a few different words that we could use to describe the Gibeonites in this situation: crafty, sneaky, deceptive, some things like that. You might recall from the previous lessons here in Joshua, they conquered Jericho, they conquered Ai after some processing. They traveled up to Mount Ebal, that was the last chapter we looked at, and reconfirmed their commitment to the covenant with God, and now have returned back down to Gilgal by Jericho, which is actually on your map here. Let me just jump in and begin reading with you in Joshua chapter 9. Verse 1, "It came about when all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowlands and on all the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon," and then he lists them: the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. "When all of them heard of it, they gathered themselves together with one accord to fight with Joshua and with Israel." I assume you can imagine it was a big splash when they took down Jericho. But then they took Ai, and then they traveled up north and did some kind of religious thing. And what's the reaction going to be? You know that they're being watched the entire time, right? There are spies from various cities watching their route. What are they doing? Where are they going? You have to be prepared if they're going to come against your own city, right? And so these people groups have gotten together and said, we got to fight as one to defeat this enemy. I guess I can say just in passing here, we really don't know a whole lot about the location of these people groups that are named. Hittite, actually, are you guys familiar with the Hittites way up in the north? There's a later kingdom up there referred to as the Hittites. It's up in modern-day Turkey. It was a great big empire kingdom in the late Bronze Age, which is not too far from this. But a lot of biblical scholars think these are a different people group that goes by what looks like in English the same name, Hittites. You remember Uriah the Hittite in the days of David, right? I'm mostly getting blank stares, but I make assumptions that you know what I'm talking about. Thank you, Rick. Canaanite, just a general term for people living throughout the land. Perizzite, Hivite, we really don't know. The Gibeonites are going to be referred to here in a few verses as Hivites, but we really don't know what that means. Jebusite is an easy one because they're inhabitants of Jebus, which is the ancient name of Jerusalem. But for the most part, we can't draw a line around where each of these people groups lived, so I'll let that pass. And I'll also say something else in passing. This is coming up on the period of the Amarna letters. Do you remember the Egyptian king Akhenaten? And he had a wife, Nefertiti, and they had a son named King Tut, Tutankhamun. Akhenaten is well known in Egyptian circles because he got rid of the worship of all gods except for one, the Aten, the sun god. That's all background. He also moved his capital to a place that had never been a city. And once he died, everybody wanted to revert back to the old ways. And so they tried to get rid of all his stuff, and they abandoned the city. Well, archaeologists discovered an archive of tablets in there. This is 1350, 1375-ish. So we're only talking a couple generations after the time of Joshua here. And what's interesting is a lot of these archives are letters sent back and forth from Egypt up to the north. Guys living in Canaan, guys living further north, up in Lebanon, up in Syria. And a number of them refer to a wild, crazy people group that they called the Habiru. And of course, you can hear some connection there between Habiru and Hebrew, right? And scholars have argued up and down the court for decades about what the relationship might be. Part of what's interesting, though, what they've discovered, they're spread throughout different libraries around the world now. I think there's close to 300 of these letters. So it's a lot of correspondence. And one of the things that they've discovered is that Egypt at that time was quite weak. They had a real control on the land of Canaan. But at this point, they have more vassal kingdoms. So the king actually of Jebus or Jerusalem is writing letters down to Egypt, sometimes in panic. These Habiru are attacking me. I need more troops. I want to remain loyal to you, king of Egypt. Akhenaten, nor his father even. All of that to say, it's kind of interesting that Egypt never comes up and really defends this Canaanite territory. These kings are on their own. And so I think that helps to explain why they've kind of banded together. There's some Egyptian presence along the main trunk road going up to the north, but the Egyptians, for some reason, are either unable or unwilling to get involved in these people coming in and taking over the cities that were once vassals to Egypt. So, what they want to do instead, the people that live here in Canaan, is band together. Three options for them. You can fight, take on these invaders. You could run, right? Say, they're going to take over. Let's take our stuff and get out of here while we still have the chance. But the Gibeonites go for a third option. And it's pretty risky. Actually, it's really risky. Starting here with verse 3. Joshua chapter 9 and verse 3. When the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they also acted craftily and set out as envoys and took worn-out sacks on their donkeys and wineskins, and worn out and torn and mended, and worn out and patched sandals on their feet, and worn out clothes on themselves, and all the food of their provision was dry and had become crumbled. And they went to Joshua to the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a far country. Now therefore, make a covenant with us." Ooh. Sneaky, right? And dangerous. What happens if you get found out? Right? That would be their assumption, I think. So they're playing a really dangerous game here. Here's the map that you have on your handout. Gibeon is not that far from Jericho, about 17 miles, if I can get my pointer out here, because some of this is all like the same color. So here we have Jericho down in the Jordan Valley. Here we have Ai, here's Bethel, and here's Gibeon. So about 17 miles down to Jericho here. They're not that far away. They're not like right next door either, and especially on foot. I mean, that's a good day journey. Pretty much all downhill from Gibeon to where they're at. it wouldn't surprise me if they could see the smoke going up from Ai when the city was burned. You know, you have fires around here sometimes that you can see the smoke from a few miles away at least. If it's a big old grass fire, you can see it quite a bit further even. Or if something's burning that shouldn't be burning, you got big black cloud, depending a little on the wind. So these guys had, I think, witnessed kind of firsthand what was going on and assumed, yeah, we're next. It's coming to us. Verse 7, Joshua 9 and verse 7. The men of Israel said to the Hivites, oh, that's an interesting one. Why are they called Hivites instead of Gibeonites? I don't know. Perhaps you are living within our land. How then will we make a covenant with you? Okay, a little bit of skepticism there. That's good. They should have hung on to some of that skepticism. It's a legitimate question. And the answer is quite curious. Verse 8, they said to Joshua, we are your servants. What kind of answer is that? It's not a flat-out denial yet. Then Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? Okay, that's a legitimate question. You'd want to know that. They said to him, verse 9, your servants have come from a very far country because of the fame of Yahweh your God. For we've heard the report of him and all that he did in Egypt and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon the king of Heshbon, and to Og the king of Bashan, who is at Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go to meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Now then, make a covenant with us. This, our bread, was warm when we took it for our provisions out of our houses on the day we left to come to you. And now, behold, it's dry and has become crumbled. And these wineskins which we filled were new, and behold, they are torn. And these, our clothes and our sandals, are worn out because of the very long journey. So the men of Israel took some of their provisions and did not ask the counsel of the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. Interesting response here. Did you pick up on that vague language? Who are you and where are you from? Oh, from a very far country. Well, why not just say which country it is? It's a long way off. Okay. So some very vague language was part of their deception here. Did you also notice the self-deprecation? We are your servants. We bow down to you. We are a weak and lowly people, if I can expound on that a little bit. So some really vague language, some self-deprecation, and some flattery. Oh, we've heard about your God. We heard what he did down in Egypt. We heard what he did across the river to these two mighty kingdoms. Oh, your God is awesome. Oh, well, yeah, I guess he is. You pick up the flattery in there, right? Theoretically, it could be legit. I'm certain that they were concerned, but I think there's some real flattery going on in here too. And then, of course, the props. The old crumbly bread, the wineskins that are torn, the clothing. And that's perhaps one of the most deceptive things in this whole account of the Gibeonites, because they were purposefully lying. This bread wasn't fresh the day they left. These clothes were not brand new the day that they left. And so the Israelites did not ask the counsel of Yahweh. Oops. That was a big mistake. They got suckered in here. Verse 15, Joshua made peace with them, and the elders swore an oath to them. I don't know what you think of when you hear that. My initial read on that kind of thing is just, hey, we promise we won't kill you. But I'm convinced it was actually more than that, based on the fact that they use the word covenant, and based on the fact that later on they say we don't want to come essentially under the curses of the covenant we've made with them, which was how covenants were typically made. I want to show you a covenant from about this time period with a little bit of text. Where'd you put it, Kris? There we go. It's an old Hittite, and this is the Hittite way up in the north in modern-day Turkey. It's a covenant that a soldier is supposed to take. And as with most covenants of this time, here's what you're supposed to do, here's what you're not supposed to do. If you fulfill the covenant, here are the blessings. If you break the covenant, here are the curses. And in this particular case, this covenant states, because it's a soldier, if you break the covenant, among other things, may your weapons break in war, may you suffer communal disgrace, may you become blind and deaf, and then some other sicknesses on top of that. Now, I'm sure that that's not exactly what was phrased in this covenant between Israel and Gibeon, but it would have been things like that. Not just, okay, we're good, we won't mess with you guys. But there would have been some kind of formal written covenant here, and if we break this covenant with you, here's the list of things that we call as a curse upon ourselves. May these things happen to us if we are not faithful to the covenant. And it would have gone both ways. The reason I think this is important is because later on, when the Israelites get angry with the elders, they say, we can't do anything about it now, because breaking that covenant would invoke those curses on them. And they think to themselves, we would rather live with these people in our midst than call down whatever these curses were, which are not named for us, rather than calling those curses down on ourselves. This is very similar, by the way, to what we saw a chapter earlier, the covenant with Moses and the Israelites, the curses and the blessings on Ebal and Gerizim. It's the same kind of stuff. There you get an actual list from God. It's different than the curses of this Hittite list. Okay. I passed a little bit of stuff here that I wanted to show you. Here's an aerial photo of the city of Gibeon. It's that little mound in the middle of the photo. It's not currently inhabited. There's not a city on it. But they are farming, and there's a couple of orchards up on top of there. And you can see the location of Bethel and Ai off to the north. So again, just to give you a feel that this is not a faraway country. A little closer shot there of Gibeon, the mound in the upper center. Archaeologists have dug here. There are not many ancient cities that you can identify as this mound is that ancient city because of an inscription. There are a handful, and this is one of them. They found a bunch of wine jar, and this is the handles and the neck, that are inscribed with the name of the city. This one, it's more than just Gibeon. Sorry, I didn't put it on there and I don't recollect. It's the name of a guy of Gibeon and his vineyard. So maybe a little bit like a wine bottle today that has the name of the company and the vineyard on it. Here's another one. I highlighted in black the word Gibeon in Hebrew there. So we actually have confirmation of this, the identification of this city, this mound. Okay. I got to catch up with myself here. At Gilgal, which is somewhere near Jericho. There are a few different little places that some people have identified as Gilgal, but it seems most likely to me that it's more of just an encampment area, and I would not expect to find buildings or city wall or that kind of thing there. This Gilgal shows up a number of times in the Old Testament. Saul actually goes down here to be crowned as king. In the Judges period, Ehud, the guy with the sword that sticks Eglon in the belly, and he's so fat that he loses his sword. That's down here at Gilgal, next to Jericho. In fact, Eglon's palace was at Jericho, and there's a few others. So we know about where it's at, but we haven't identified an actual site, and I really don't think we would expect to either. Okay. Chapter 9, Kris. So Joshua made peace with them, made a covenant, and let them live. And the elders, the leaders of the congregation, swore an oath to them. Verse 16, it came about at the end of 3 days, after they'd made a covenant with them, that they heard that they were neighbors, and that they were living within their land. Then the sons of Israel set out and came to their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon and Shepherah and Beeroth and Kiriath Yearim. Looks like Kiriath Jearim, right? 4 cities listed there. Let's see. Skip some stuff here. There's the one I want. We think we know where all 4 of these cities are at. Gibeon is identified with complete certainty right here. Kiriath Yearim is certainly right here. Shepherah probably right there. Beeroth right here. So Gibeon would have been like the mother city, and these others were daughter cities that they were all kind of one coalition. And I wanted to read verse 18 there as well. The sons of Israel did not strike them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by Yahweh, the God of Israel. And the whole congregation grumbled against the leaders. Why did they grumble? Why did they care? Well, you guys, speaking to the leaders here, you guys just gave away the heartland of our nation. This is right in the middle of the promised land, and you guys just gave it away. Yeah, I'd grumble too. You got suckered, but you didn't come ask us. You didn't go ask God. You just got suckered into giving away a central part of what was to be our inheritance. And when you look at it that way, I can understand why they grumbled. It's like, this was supposed to be ours, and you guys just gave it away. Prime real estate. This You can't really see it on that map. These are kind of centered around what geographers refer to as the central Benjamin Plateau. And it's some prime real estate. Great for growing grain, vineyards, olive groves, all that kind of stuff. Well, Joshua is going to have to eat some humble pie. Or eat some crow if you prefer that analogy. Verse 19. All the leaders said to the whole congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we cannot touch them." Ouch. Verse 20. This we will do to them, even let them live, lest wrath be upon us for the oath which we swore to them. So again, the actual detailed stipulations of this covenant are not recorded for us here, but they are more afraid of invoking those curses than they are of leaving the Gibeonites alive. So that should tell you they were some pretty serious stipulations, some pretty serious curses on this covenant. And the leader said to them, "Let them live." So they became hewers of wood and drawers of water for the whole congregation, just as the leaders had spoken to them. And then Joshua has his say in verse 22. Joshua called for them and spoke to them, saying, "Why have you deceived us, saying, 'We are from very far from you,' when you are living within our land? Now, therefore, you are cursed, and you shall never cease being slaves, both hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God." So that's Joshua's words. We can't kill you, but we can enslave you. Which, they're like, okay, well, at least we're still alive. What comes to mind when you hear, I love these old words, hewers of wood and drawers? It's spelled the same way as drawers, right? Let's see. Woodcutters and water haulers. Why do they need woodcutters and water haulers for the tabernacle, for the altar? Yeah. So we need wood in order to burn sacrifices. And for a nation, that could be quite a bit of wood. Even if each individual family only does one or two sacrifices a year there at the tabernacle, somebody's got a bunch of wood to cut. And guess who it's going to be? The Gibeonites. Yeah. The whole nation. Yeah. Yeah, it is, because we think of that word congregation as in a church context usually. Yeah, it's there's a lot of history behind the use of that word. It appears over and over and over again in the Pentateuch when the Israelites are coming out of Egypt. The whole congregation did this or that. And yeah, what word would you substitute for that? Assembly? Yeah, that would be a good substitution. That maybe doesn't have quite the churchy connotation to it. Yeah. You know, all of our words, I mean, even like a, synagogue, or even the word church, Greek ekklesia, they didn't originally have all of the baggage that we think of. We think of church, we think of a building with a steeple, but in the first century, it was completely different idea. It was just an assembly of people who are called together. So I think it's that same kind of thing. hmm That's a good question, because he does say for the whole congregation at one point, but twice later on he'll specifically say for the altar. And so I think it's probably best to understand that term, the whole congregation, in the context of the altar. So that pretty much anybody from the entire nation that comes in to the tabernacle to offer sacrifice doesn't have to worry about wood or water. Right. Yeah, they do remain a cohesive group. A couple of interesting things here. Before Joshua dies, we will see them establish the tabernacle at Shiloh. That's going to be roughly up here. And it was there for centuries, like 300 years. Did some of the Gibeonites move up there? Did they go up in teams to fulfill these requirements? Was it just left, well, never mind, after a couple of generations? That's an enigma. I don't know exactly what was going on there. The text doesn't say anything about the Gibeonites while the tabernacle is up at Shiloh. However, we're just going through 1 Samuel and saw that the tabernacle was at Nob. So after Shiloh got sacked, it appears to go down to Gilgal, comes up to Jerusalem, and then apparently moves to Gibeon, because both Kings and Chronicles talk about Solomon going up to the great high place at Gibeon, where the altar of Yahweh was, and he offers 1,000 sacrifices, and that's also the place where God came to him in a dream and said, ask me whatever you want and I'll give it to you. Gibeon? Why at Gibeon? And I wonder if that's not related to this whole episode, where the Gibeonites are supposed to take care of it anyway, of these particular aspects of it. It's intriguing. The text doesn't actually point that out, but it's an interesting place for the tabernacle to end up at Gibeon, given this. Yeah. Well, they didn't make them priests, but yeah, to be servicing the temple of God, tabernacle of God. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting thing to do. I didn't follow up. Wood for sacrifices. Water? Laundry? Purification? Yeah. Washing hands, washing equipment, washing away. Yeah, perhaps even washing the sacrifices. Mm-hmm. We know during the temple period there was a large pool for washing the sheep before they were sacrificed. Washing away the blood from the sacrifices. Yeah, there's quite a bit of water used at the tabernacle. When they were wandering in the wilderness, you let it drain into the sand and then move on, right? But when the tabernacle becomes established at a particular place, that's different. You have to clean up. Okay. I left off with 22, 23, 24. So they answered Joshua and said, because it was certainly told your servants, that Yahweh your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. Therefore, we feared greatly for our lives because of you, and have done this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hands. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. So they basically turn around and say, okay, you want to make us water haulers and woodcutters? We're okay with that. It's your call. We'll do that. You let us live. You just wonder what some of the stories that eventually came out of this might have been. In a sense, they themselves express faith here. We have heard what your God did. I mean, it sounds a lot like Rahab. And we were afraid. And of course, fearing Yahweh is often a sign of a way that faith is phrased in the Old Testament. And you just wonder if maybe some of these people who feared the Israelite God and eventually were pressed into service for the tabernacle, if maybe some of them became followers of him. We know there were lots of other non-Israelites that converted and became part of the Israelite faith. And maybe these were some of them. Okay, so last couple verses there. Thus he did to them and delivered them from the hands of the sons of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day woodcutters and water haulers for the congregation and for the altar of Yahweh to this day in the place where he would choose. Well, if you're wondering where the place that he would choose was, it was Shiloh. We get that real specifically a little later in this book. Eventually, it would become Jerusalem, but for many centuries, it was at Shiloh. So this whole shenanigan with deception and covenant making and what did God think of this? Well, we know he wasn't pleased that they didn't ask him before they made a covenant. That's pretty obvious in the text. But I find God's take on this kind of interesting. In the next chapter, the Gibeonites are going to get attacked by the rest of the Canaanites. The Israelites will go to their aid because they have a covenant. And God blesses them in that. In fact, God fights for them. We'll see that when they're chasing off the rest of these other kings. God is really active in that. So that tells me, now that the covenant is made, God expects them to follow through on that, to remain faithful to it. Was it a bad covenant? Was it a bad idea to make a covenant? Yeah. But now that you've made it, does that give you an excuse to get out of it? No. To take that a step further, in 2 Samuel 21, Saul, we don't find out about this till after the fact. The land gets hit with a 3-year drought in the days of David. And finally, David goes to God and says, "What's up?" And God says, "It's because of Saul. He tried, in his zeal, to wipe out the Gibeonites." So, centuries later, Saul says, "You know what? We never should have made that covenant. Going to wipe these people out, be done with them once for all. We can have the land that was ours." And he kills a bunch of them. And God responds to that with a 3-year drought, which is essentially the same as what he sends on Ahab for his disobedience in the days of Elijah. And David then turns around, goes to the Gibeonites and says, "What do you want?" And they say, We can't take anybody's life. He says, no, I'll give you whatever you want. They say, give us 7 descendants of Saul. We'll kill them, and we'll call it even. And that's what happens. David hands over to them 7 descendants of Saul. They take out their revenge on them, and after they are buried, God says, okay, I'll send rain on your land again. So even centuries later, God expects the descendants of Israel to honor that covenant with the Gibeonites. And when they don't, God gets upset at them. I just find that interesting. It says some things, I think, about how God expects us to live. A couple of points to ponder here. Be careful about entering into an agreement too quickly. I think that's just a general life principle. Those of you that have been around for a few decades know, if somebody's really pushing you, do it today, do it today, do it today, it's probably not a good idea. If these guys had put it off, said, let us think about it, pray for a week, they would have found out the truth. It was only 3 days later that they discovered the truth. Something to be said about not jumping ahead too quickly on agreements like that. Okay, this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but might be a good idea to seek God's counsel when you're faced with a decision. Right? I mean, what can it hurt? That's all tongue-in-cheek. Yeah, you should be asking God's advice on stuff like this. And I think you can spread this out to a whole ton of decisions that we have to make. Be in constant communion with Him about things that you have questions about, maybe need to do, maybe shouldn't be doing. They didn't, and so use that as a reminder to yourself. I should seek God's counsel. And then last but not least, I think we learn from this that God expects us to honor our promises. The hard part, even if we've been duped. I know we have some recourse legally if somebody sells us a lemon. Sometimes you can go back and get your money's worth back or exchange or something. But at the end of the day, if you've made a promise to do something, you have an agreement in place, I would take away from this that God expects us as His children to honor those promises. Keeping your word even to your own hurt. Yeah, that would have been a good one to put up here. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I think that's exactly what we learn here. One of the things that we learn. And I think there the Israelites did the right thing. Having made a bad decision, don't compound it by breaking the covenant and invoking curses on yourself. You've given your word. It hurts. Yes, the other party was wrong. They duped you. But you still made the agreement. Stick with it. And I really think God honors that kind of thing, even if it's to our own hurt, to honor the promise that we've made. Yeah. It's kind of sad that for us today, it's almost fable or legend how, in the Old West, a man's word meant something. A shake of the hand was all you needed. For us, that's like, oh man, it's like a legend, a fable. Nobody does that anymore. Can I find a loophole? Yeah, and even if it's written, well, so what? I don't have to abide by that. Yeah, yeah. Maybe you should turn around now and ask. Yeah, it's not recorded. Uh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So yeah, kind of an interesting chapter with a bunch of twists and turns here, but I think a lot of application for us too. Armin?
You mentioned that we had some historical evidence that Egypt was probably weak at this time. They took a big hit during the Exodus, right? When they failed militarily.
Yeah.
It's been 40 years. Are they still suffering from that, or has something else happened? Do we know?
Are they still suffering from the fallout of the Exodus at this point? I mean, in some ways, I think they almost have to be suffering from that still. The Egyptians were not fond of recording defeats. In fact, even when they were defeated, they would twist it as much as they could to make it look like it didn't come out badly. And so it's not surprising that they don't crow in their inscriptions about, oh, we got whooped up on by these Israelites and their God. There's a lot of speculation about Akhenaten turning to a single God and whether there might be some connection there. It's hard to say. But we do know, here I actually wrote some of this down. Okay. Akhenaten's dad, Amenhotep III, only undertook one campaign during his entire reign, and that was south to Nubia. And some of the guys before him, if you go back like 100 years earlier, shortly before the Exodus, the Egyptians are strong, and they're basically ruling the Mediterranean basin. Multiple campaigns up into Lebanon and fighting with Mesopotamian kings and all this, but that really shrinks down. And during this period, they're staying at home. We have letters that they wrote up there, but they're not making campaigns up in that direction. So, yeah, I think there probably is a connection with the Exodus, the aftermath of that, a generation or two later. Katie? Yeah. Yeah. What kind of gods did they worship, and would they have had to like give up those gods in order to join with or as part of their agreement here? We know generally the gods that were worshipped by the Canaanites, and they're all names that are familiar to you: Baal or Baal, Hadad, Ishtar, Astarte. Everybody throughout this region is worshiping the same group of gods. That's kind of an ironic question because the Israelites themselves turned to these gods so quickly. I don't know, could you suppose perhaps having Gibeonites in your area that are worshiping gods like this may have had an effect? And yet, it doesn't just happen in the middle of the country, it happens everywhere, that the Israelites turn to these false gods annoyingly quickly. So, yeah, it's hard to say. The text doesn't address it directly, but you do have to wonder. Yeah. Yeah, maybe so. And then you find faith in the most odd places. Ruth, a Moabite, clear out of the country. It's like, or Rahab. Yeah, I am over and need to quit. Let me close us in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for your word and for this section in particular on the Gibeonites. I just pray that you would help us to be careful about the agreements that we enter into. And I pray that once we do enter into an agreement, whether it's business or marriage or some other kind of contract, pray that you would help us to be faithful to our word, to be faithful to the things that we've agreed to do. And we know that you bless that, and that you do not bless when we break those things and are unfaithful. And so help us to do what is right and to be faithful both to you and to those that we have within our charge or that we have agreements with. Thank you for the advice that you give us through this story, and I pray that our ears would be open to hear it. In your name I pray. Amen.